When most speakers start to tell a story, they make a huge mistake. And maybe you've done this yourself. Certainly back when I was starting out, building skills, something I did all the time. And the story didn't work right. And I kept thinking, why isn't the story working right? I don't get it. What's the matter with the story? Well, maybe it's just that you're just not a good storyteller. Well, that could be, but I mean, other people tell stories. Why couldn't I do that? I didn't understand what it was about a story, what was really so important in the story, until I finally, through reading, discovering, working on this, was able to help out with the help of my mentors and find out what it really was about a story that really makes a story interesting, really captivates and pulls people in. And that is dialogue. Now notice in the story that I just gave that there was dialogue. Dialogue simply means that there was some talking going on. I was talking to myself about what's a story. Now what most people would do in this situation, they say is, I never really understood how to do a story. It was really a problem, and I thought about different ways to do it, and just didn't really understand it. And one day, with the help of my mentors, I figured out what I was supposed to be doing. That's what most people would do. But if you do it that way, there's no dialogue. So dialogue is magical. And you may be wondering, Tim, what the heck is dialogue? How do you use it? Great questions. Glad you asked. Dialogue. So today you're going to find out about dialogue. Why dialogue is so very important to your speech, and how simple and easy is to create effective dialogue if you follow these tips. Each tip will kind of build on the other. First, the basic thing about the nature of dialogue. And then a little bit about how to make sure that dialogue works, and then how to make the dialogue interesting. If the dialogue isn't interesting, then there's really not much there. Then you get stuck at the very beginning. And maybe you've had this happen too, where you're thinking about, well, geez, Tim, I don't know what to talk about, I don't know what to say in the thing, and you get stuck right there at the beginning. You can't move on because you don't understand the basis of how dialogue works. And that's, I think, why people fall back at narrations. Make sense? Why people tend to narrate things, it just seems easier. Yeah, Tim's a big bother to talk about dialogue and back and forth and all that sort of stuff. Much easier just to narrate things. There I was, I didn't know what was going on, and then I found something else and my life changed. Great, simple, easy, no dialogue. But it's not powerful. It's not effective. There's something magic about dialogue. In fact, even if you don't intend to, you ever found that yourself paying close attention when people are talking back and forth? Or when somebody's on the phone, if they're talking really loudly, you start hearing everything going on, and you imagine what the other person is saying. Or if two people are talking around you, say you're at a restaurant, people are talking around you, you start hearing those different parts of the dialogue. Do you ever get kind of caught up in their lives? Especially with cell phones, it seems like all the time you're surrounded by people in dialogue. One-sided dialogue. Oh yeah. Well, me too. Oh, come on. No, really, did they? Oh, wow. Notice that this is just one-sided dialogue, but already you're thinking, who did what? What happened? What's going on here? It's the power of dialogue. It draws you in, it interests you, it keeps you going. But there are a few things to understand about dialogue, an effective dialogue, and how to make dialogue work. Once you understand those things, you'll find that your stories, even your speeches, are much easier to create, more effective. You kind of grab people and pull them in. You don't really have to do a lot of work. That's the magic of dialogue. You don't really have to do a lot of work. You just go up there, do some dialogue, use these tips talking about, and things just start to kind of pay off for you. You think, wow, there really is something to that dialogue thing. As you'll see in just a moment. Well, about now you might be wondering, So Tim, what the heck is dialogue? What does dialogue have to do with anything? Why is it so important? That's a great point. You know, what is dialogue? What's the nature of dialogue? How does it work? What makes for effective dialogue? And how do I know I'm having dialogue? How do I know I'm having narration? You're in a situation, you're telling a story, you may think you're using dialogue, but actually you're narrating things. You're saying, wait a minute, Tim. Okay, you're saying I'm narrating, but how do I know? And it's this simple. And it's this powerful. And if you start using this tip and understanding how this works in dialogue, you really develop and grow your speeches. Your stories start to pop. Things start to get interesting. People say, hey, that's really some powerful stuff. And it's just one simple thing. It all comes down to the nature of what is dialogue. What is dialogue all about? And that simple thing is dialogue is back and forth. That's it. Dialogue is back and forth. Keep that in mind, and you can just rattle off speeches no problem. So you're wondering, what do you mean dialogue is back and forth? What the heck does that mean? Well, good question. What does back and forth mean? Back and forth means somebody says something and somebody says another thing. You ever notice in a conversation that somebody will talk and somebody else will respond, right? I mean, that's a good conversation. If you're in a conversation where all you're doing is listening and you never get a chance to respond, you may want to find another conversation. Because not only you're not having dialogue, that's just pretty boring, right? Just hearing some person go on and you don't get a chance to respond, it's boring. Talk a little bit more about the importance of avoiding that and how you can avoid that boringness in dialogue. It's boring to have that sort of thing happen. So dialogue has to be back and forth. Somebody says something, somebody else responds. And it can be as simple as saying, putting words in your audience, like, you ever wondered about dialogue? And then you, as a speaker, responding. Hey, good question. That creates also a dialogue. So the purpose of dialogue in stories is to recreate this back and forth nature of conversation. So to make your stories interesting, to make sure that they engage people, pull them in, there has to be this back and forth. And that's what dialogue is all about, getting that back and forth. And it's pretty simple. Just somebody says something, somebody else replies, somebody else says something. So they could say, hey Tim, how are you doing? Oh, Robert, I'm doing pretty fine. What's happening with you? Oh, not much. Things are pretty good. It's back and forth. Back and forth. So just using that simple tip you start to use, okay, you get it, Tim, dialogue is back and forth, and then you understand. That's different than saying, well, I met Robert the other day, and he was fine, and I was fine too, and we chatted for a while. That's narration. See the difference? First time, people were actually saying something. That's important in dialogue. People have to actually say something. It has to be somebody says something, somebody else responds, and back and forth like that. If you have a situation where you can't actually tell what people says, then you have narration. And narration is boring. So avoiding narration already will make your story better, will make your speech better. Because narration is boring. Dialogue is back and forth, keeps it interesting, keeps it popping. It's simple. You may wonder, Tim, wait a minute, back and forth, that's good. That works. So I can just go back and forth and back and forth. Hey, Robert, how you doing? Tim, I'm doing pretty good. How are you? Oh, great, Robert, everything's going fine. Oh, Tim, everything's going fine with me too. Oh, fantastic, everything's fine with me too. And, oh, Tim, great. You can just go back and forth forever, right? Not quite. And next thing we're going to talk about is how often you go back and forth. Because you can't just do it forever. Back and forth is very powerful. You have to understand this next tip, this next idea, to really understand the power of dialogue. So sure, it's back and forth, but back and forth for how long? So dialogue is back and forth. That helps you a lot right there. You get that. Okay, Tim, I get it. Dialogue's back and forth. Somebody said this, somebody else says something. But how often does this back and forth have to go? Well, of course, technically, you just keep on doing that forever. You could have a 2-hour speech with two people just talking back and forth about it. Hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing pretty good. How's your car? Oh, my car is pretty good. How's yours? Oh, having a little bit of trouble with the pump there, but I think I'm getting it fixed. Oh, the pump. Tell me more about that. You can keep doing that for 2 hours. You're not going to have an audience. Most people will leave after 2 hours of that. Most people leave after 5 minutes of that. Heck, 3 minutes of that may be pushing it. So you're thinking, Tim, well, wait a minute. If dialogue is back and forth, why can't I just keep on going back and forth forever? Because you got to stop it sometime. Now, the advice of world champion speaker Craig Valentine is go back and forth, but no more than 3 times. No more than 3 times. So if you go back and forth, you say, Tim, how are you doing today? Robert, got a little trouble with my car. Tim, what's the matter with the car? Back and forth. And then find some other way to bring it out. So having problems with the carburetor. Okay. So you can do it that way. Hey, how are you doing? I'm having problems with the car's carburetor. Sounds kind of redundant. Carburetor. No, those are 2 words. Okay. But back and forth. 3 times. No more than 3 times. 2 is fine. 2 is fine. Call, response, that's it. You're done. No problem. But no more than 3 times. Why? Because if you start going back and forth more than that, it starts to become boring. Not interesting. It doesn't pull people in. It doesn't get them involved because they're thinking after a while, okay, where's this going? What's happening here? And they just give up on it. So 3 times is pretty good. Now, there is a way to get around that. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But for right now, just think about that magical phrase of 3. There's something special about 3s. Just doing something 3 times there's a sense of completeness. Somebody talks, somebody responds, somebody else talks. Hey, how are you doing? I'm having trouble with my carburetor. Oh, let me take a look at that. Let me go out and take a look at your car. Wow. Already, you're getting a picture of what's going on. And then you see you can easily transition to talking about the car, what's going on with the car, the scene inside the car. 3 times is good. So you've got somebody talking, somebody responding, and somebody talking again. And if you think of it that way, 3 times, that'll keep you going back and forth the right amount of times. Now you're saying, Tim, wait a minute, 3, is that a hard one? What if I do 4? What if I do 5? Well, you could do 4. Maybe you could get away with 4. Tim, how are you doing? Robert, having trouble with my carburetor. Tim, let's take a look at it. Okay, Robert, the car's right over here. I mean, you could do that sort of thing. But if you go too much past 3, you see you're starting to get into that back and forth with no point. And the audience is thinking, okay, where's this going? Where's this going? What's happening here? You've been in stories like that? You hear people going back and forth and you're thinking, oh, I don't know what's going on here. I think they're just killing time. That's not good. That's it. That's exactly it. So keep in mind 3 minutes. 3 times. 3 times back and forth. And even that can take about, well, it doesn't take that long. You could do 3 minutes back and forth, but it really doesn't take that long to do. Somebody says it, somebody else replies, somebody else responds to that, and done. And then you can go into something else. So then maybe you start narrating. Hey, Tim, how are you doing? Robert, having trouble with my carburetor. Oh, let's take a look at the car. You went out to the car. There it was. Then just talk a little bit more about the car. But right now you're thinking, Tim, not very interesting a story so far. You're talking about a guy with a carburetor and going out to a car. Nothing really there. There's something missing. What am I missing here? Good point. In a little bit, you're going to find out the thing that's missing so far in your dialogue. All right. You're going back and forth. That's going really well. You're thinking, okay, this isn't too bad. And you've only done it 3 times. Fabulous. But as you start going through it and practicing it and rehearsing it, you're thinking, there's something missing here. There's something I'm not getting. We're going back and forth 3 times, and I'm definitely using dialogue. We're going back and forth, but it's not coming together. There's nothing there. Some poet put it, there's no there. There's nothing. You ever felt that about a story? You're thinking, I know it's an interesting story, but somehow it's not. This dialogue thing is not helping at all. I don't get it. What's missing? And it's true. There's something important still missing for your dialogue. And that is conflict. Conflict. You want to grow the conflict. Grow the conflict in your dialogue. That's what it means. You want to build up the conflict. So far in the examples, you've seen some guy talk to another guy about the carburetor, and the other saying, well, let's go out to the car and see what's going on, but it's not going to build that conflict. It's not really going to get the story going, because conflict drives the story. If you're telling a story and there's no conflict, you got a boring story. And maybe you've heard these. They're usually narrated like, oh, I got up in the morning, it was a wonderful day, went out, I made breakfast, it was a beautiful day, nothing happened, it was a great day, I went to sleep. Woke up next day, beautiful day, wonderful, went outside, had a great breakfast, and on it goes. Going to saying, hey, stop with that story, it's horrible. Conflict. Gotta have conflict. Without conflict, there's nothing there. Now, the great thing for you is that dialogue naturally builds conflict. Because somebody says something, somebody else responds, and then somebody responds to that. So you can build the conflict back and forth. And a simple way to build conflict is if you get a dialogue where somebody wants somebody else to do something they don't want to do. That'll build a lot of conflict. You can grow the conflict greatly that way. Grow that conflict greatly that way by just saying, hey, I don't want to do that. Because then your dialogue goes sort of like, Bob, you know you got to get out of bed today. You got things to do. You've been sitting in there for a week. Tim, I don't want to get out of bed. Nobody's going to get me out of this bed. I've been sitting here, and everything is going just fine. Look, Bob, if you don't get out of bed today, you're going to lose your job. They're going to take that job away from you. You know how important that job is to you. You're going to make any money. You're going to have to go on unemployment. This is going to be really bad. See? You grow the conflict. On the one hand, you've got a guy sitting there in bed, on the other hand, somebody else trying to get him out of bed. They don't want to do it, but that causes more conflict. So grow the conflict naturally with your dialogue. So getting back to the car, you could say, Robert, having problems with my car. Oh, Tim, you're having problems with your car, but you bought that car. It's a brand new car. What could possibly go wrong with it? Well, I was out driving, and I don't know what happened, but the squirrel jumped in front of me, and I just smashed right into a tree. Whoa! Right there, your whole just thinking, what happened? Some guy smashed into a tree? And those of you who saw the movie Up are thinking, squirrel? It's okay if you don't get that joke. Just review the movie Up, and you'll understand it. But anyway, conflict is built by the dialogue. Dialogue back and forth grows that conflict. Even in just 3 back and forths, you can grow the conflict. Somebody says something, somebody responds again. That grows the conflict, and then you've got something going on. But that's why it's so important to have dialogue as opposed to narration. Narration doesn't grow any conflict. It's just steady like this. Dialogue, somebody says something, somebody else escalates, somebody builds it up even more, and pretty soon there's this conflict going on, there's this problem going on, and your story has a great start. So growing the conflict adds a great kick, a great start to your great stories. Most speakers tend to narrate their stories, and they describe what's happening. And because they describe what's happening, it's boring. It's two-dimensional. They say things like, and then I got upset at that person, and I went over to the other person, and I started getting upset at them, and then I walked over to that person, and so the other guy, it's boring. Nothing really happens. And it doesn't happen because there's no dialogue. Dialogue is the magic ingredient that takes a boring story, can make it more interesting if you follow a few simple directions. First thing about dialogue is it has to be back and forth. Somebody says something, somebody else responds. Somebody says something, somebody else responds. It goes back and forth. If you just have people saying one thing, then you know a dialogue. Just say, hi, how are you doing? So Bob, hey, Tom, how are you doing? Bob greeted me that way every day. He always said he was a nice guy. It's not dialogue. Tom, how are you doing? Tim, I'm doing great. That's dialogue. At least somebody says something, somebody else responds. And they can go back and forth. So that's the simplest. Dialogue is back and forth. And this back and forth communication is naturally interesting. There's something magical about it. If somebody's on their cell phone and they're talking real loudly, you start hearing just one side of the dialogue, all of a sudden you wonder, what's going on there? Hey, how are you doing? Yeah, I heard about that. Oh, no. No! Wow. That's just one-sided dialogue. Now, right here you're thinking, what happened? What's wow? What's oh no? You want to know? And that's why dialogue has to be back and forth. You only hear one side of a conversation, you get really frustrated. You hear both sides of a conversation, you get interested, and you get a sense of, oh, that's what's going on. Okay, I get it now. Now I know what's going on. So dialogue is powerful. Pull people in, get them interested. But in doing dialogue, be careful. You only need to do it 3 times before you do something else. Before you can move from dialogue into a little bit of narration. That's fine. 3 times. Somebody says something, somebody responds, somebody else says something. Now you're wondering, Tim, why 3 times? Why only 3 times? Why not do more than 3 times? Because if you do it more than 3 times, it starts to get boring. Maybe you can do it 4, maybe you can do it 5, but after a while, nothing really is going on. So you got to have something that develops this dialogue, and that's by doing it, keeping it to 3 times. And after 3 times, then you shift into something else. So it's like, hey Bob, how's your car? Oh, I had a horrible thing happen in the car the other day. I just went out there and I just smashed it. Oh, is everybody okay? So you get go from that. And then you can tell a little bit about it. Maybe you tell a little bit about, step back and talk about the family, how the family is, how important is the family, and then build that in, and then go back to the dialogue. But 3 times is enough for that dialogue back and forth. But even if you have back and forth dialogue, you'll only keep it to 3 times before you go into some type of narration or description. There's still one other thing you have to have good dialogue and to have a good story. And that's conflict. Conflict. You want to keep the conflict just by growing the conflict. The conflict has to grow. Biggest problem with narration is narration just starts out like this. Everything is flat. Nothing really happens. With dialogue, somebody says something, somebody else says something, and it just grows from there. Hi Tom, how's your car? Oh, I just smashed the car. Oh, is everybody okay? That just grows right there. Boom, boom, boom. Already. And it gets the audience interested. Oh, what's going on? And yet, if you narrate this sort of thing, Tom hit his car the other day. However, everybody was all right and there weren't any injuries. Boring. When you say, Tom had an accident with his car the other day and he had a few people who were hurt. Even that, boring. Dialogue brings everything alive. So if you're in a situation telling a story, make sure you're avoiding that narration and do it in dialogue.